organized this. So thank you, Vijay. Thank you, Shashi, Minnie, Eamon, Nicole, Aparna, Vijay, for organizing this terrific event. And last but not the least, I want to thank the parents because I want the kids to know how lucky they are that you have such supportive and such amazing parents and the educational institutions that you come from and the opportunities that your parents have given you. And finally, I just wanted to recognize all of our shared cultural heritage. It's a heritage that is built on three pillars. One is family, and we all recognize the importance of family. The second is education. We all value education, and the third is just a culture of exceptionalism. I know that Ty and all of your parents stress that whatever you do, be exceptional at it. What I wanted to do today was I just wanted to, number one, just share a little bit of my life story with you and tell you how I went from being one of you to, to kind of the journey that I had. And number two is talk about why you're so very lucky to be alive today. There's no greater time in history to be a young person than today. And, it's an era that I call Civilization 3.0. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And then I want to talk about entrepreneurship and what it means. And so that's kind of the discussion today. So let me start by talking about my own journey. When you get to be an old guy like me, you are able to reflect back on your life and say, was there a defining moment in your life? Was there a point that made you who you are? And for me, it happened when I was a little boy in Bombay. I had a little transistor radio, and I had my ear plastered to the transistor radio. And I heard these magical words, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. And of course, I was listening to the Voice of America broadcast the moon landing live all the way to Bombay. And I thought to myself, wow, that's amazing. Who are these people that were able to take a man, put him in a box, and send him 250,000 miles away to land on a rock flawlessly? The very first time they tried it, it was flawless. What ingenuity, what brilliance, what courage, what vision. And I said, you know what, I'm going to dedicate my life to studying science and technology, and I'm going to figure out a way to get to America. So that was the start of my journey. And I started at IIT, I applied to MIT, and they must have made a mistake in the admission process because they admitted me. But in those days, you couldn't really get foreign exchange for an undergraduate education. And so I literally had to camp outside the office of the head of the Reserve Bank of India, kind of like the Federal Reserve in the United States, and get him to agree that he would give me some foreign exchange. I just hung out outside his office the whole day, and finally at the end of the day, he took pity on me and saw me for a few minutes, and he said, look, I'll let you convert enough money for 1 quarter of tuition, and I'll give you some spending money. And in those days, it was $50. So lo and behold, I showed up on the shores of Boston with $50 in my pocket, but really big dreams in my head. And I started my journey. I was close to your age. I was about 17 years old at the time. And that was the kind of beginning of my journey. Now I went on to do a couple of degrees at MIT. I did a degree at Harvard Business School. And I was working as an engineer, and I was trained as a hardware engineer when the big idea came to me. So it seemed like hardware was always on time, always on budget, but the software just never seemed to get there. And so the big idea that I had was, why not do software like hardware is done? So if you look at a computer, if you take the top of your PC, then what you see is there's a backplane or a bus. The problem is broken into pieces, and you plug cards into the bus. Now, the way that software had been done is that every time you built an application, you had to build infrastructure, you had to build the application, and then you had to build bridges to talk to other applications. And so if you had n different systems. You were basically building n times n minus 1 or n squared bridges back and forth to communicate. So my idea was just do a software bus through a single interface, through a single API, have all of these applications communicate. And being a hardware engineer, we had the concept of interrupts. And so the idea was make it real time. And I invented this concept called publish and subscribe. So the first place that I got to apply this was on trading floors. And because I had done well at school, I had been able to talk my way to the very top of Goldman Sachs. And at that time, Goldman Sachs was run by a gentleman called Bob Rubin. And so I convinced him that he should give me the opportunity to create this software bus for his trading floor. He said, hey, look, the thing that scares me is my trading floor. I got stacks of these video monitors, and can your technology do something to replace them? So I pitched him on this idea of a software bus, and he liked it. And he said, okay, I'll give you a contract to figure out how to use this bus, but you got to explain it to my partners. And he said, before the market opens, we have breakfast, and so come join us. So anyways, I got up, and before the market opens, it was quite early, and of course California time's 3-hour time difference. It was even earlier. So I show up there at 7:30 in the morning, and there's a room, and the partners who run Goldman Sachs were sitting there, and I was, it was me, and I was a few years older than you guys, just out of school, and I was very nervous, so I was like, how am I going to talk to these guys? They're all legends. They built Goldman, they built Wall Street. So as I started talking, the door opened, and this guy walked in, and I waved them away. Not me, I'm sorry, but Bob waved them away. And sitting next to Bob Rubin was a gentleman called Bob Mnuchin, whose son is now the Treasury Secretary. And he was actually, even though he wasn't the CEO, he was actually the senior person in the room. So then he said, go on. And I started talking again, and then a couple of minutes later, the same guy walks in, and Mnuchin waves him away. And the third time it happened, he taps me on the shoulder, and he says, son, you got to stop tapping your feet. So what happened is I was so nervous that I kept tapping my feet. It was like a nervous habit. And underneath the carpet was a switch. And so every time I tapped my foot, it would summon the waiter. So that was my start of my first contract, my first entrepreneurial journey. But after that, things went smoothly. And I was able to build out this technology. I came back to Silicon Valley and went to my friend Scott McNeely, who had a company called Sun, borrowed a Sun workstation from him. And in my first book, he wrote the foreword, and he said that I never gave him the workstation back, but of course I gave him billions of dollars in business. And we ended up automating and digitizing Wall Street, sold that company to Reuters and started a new company, and that became TIPCO. So that was kind of my business journey. Now, along the way, I fell in love with the game of basketball. And I know many of you are curious, how does a boy from Bombay end up owning a basketball team? And so I was a single dad, and I was trying to find ways to spend more time with my little girl, Anjali. And I thought, well, you know what, I'll coach her basketball team. Now, those of you who were born in India, you know that we don't play basketball in India, at least in those days. I'm trying to change that. We play cricket, we play football or soccer, not basketball. So I showed up at the practice facility in Redwood City. It was called Pace Place. And there was all these different courts in that facility. It was a giant facility. And I looked around the room, and all the other coaches were ex-Division I, Stanford, Duke dads. They were 7 feet tall. And then there was me. And I didn't know at the time what a draft was. So they'd had a draft, and they had picked all the best players. And they gave me the girls that nobody else wanted. So I was holding the basketball. I was standing in front of this motley crew, and I was thinking, I did this to spend more time with Anjali, but I'm about to make a fool of myself. And I thought, I got to figure this out. So the first day, what I did is I said very confidently, I didn't want to look like I didn't know what I was doing. So I said, girls, today we're going to run. So I made them run up and down the court for an hour, just relays, just run. Then after that, I said, I can't just keep having them run. I got to figure this game out. So being a bit of a math nerd, I studied the game and I created a math equation for the game. And in the next practice, I taught them the math equation. And basically, the essence of it was you win the turnover battle and you do a full court press, for those of you who know basketball, the whole game, and ended up winning every single game and taking the team to the national championship. And Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book based on that called David and Goliath, for those of you who are fans of Malcolm Gladwell. But out of that, I fell in love with basketball. And so when my friend and neighbor, Joe Lacob, was making a bid for the Warriors against Larry Ellison, who had started Oracle, Joe asked me to join him. And of course I said yes, because I had fallen in love with this game. So we ended up buying the Warriors, and they were a bad team. We got booed. And then just as the team started winning and went on a tear, I was approached by the folks in Sacramento, and they said that Steve Ballmer had a deal to buy the team and move it to Seattle. And would I please step in and buy the team and save it and keep it in Sacramento? Now, of course, I live in Silicon Valley. I'm a Bay Area person, and Sacramento is a ways off. And so I thought to myself, why? I live in Silicon Valley. The Warriors are winning. But then at some point I saw the passion of the fans, and I realized that, that really without the team, the Sacramento, which is our state capital, would have nothing. And I had been very fortunate as an immigrant, and I had been given a lot, and that maybe this was something I needed to do. So I stepped in and, got into kind of a bidding thing, ended up winning the team. And as part of my commitment, I had to give a personal guarantee that I would build a new arena in a certain time frame. And if I didn't, then they could take the team back from me. So again, the moral of the story is I keep signing up for things that I know nothing about. I was a hardware engineer. I built a lot of software company and never coached basketball, and did that. And now I'm like signing up to build an arena, and I know nothing about real estate. So anyways, but it ended up fine. We invested $1 billion into the city, and if you ever come to Sacramento, I invite all of you to come to a game when we're past the COVID crisis. And we did in fact build the world's best arena. It's also the world's greenest arena. It runs completely off the sun, and we're off to the races. So that was kind of my journey, and where I sit today. I've never been more excited about the future as I am today, and which gets me kind of to the second part of our conversation. I believe that we're entering a new era, and I call this era Civilization 3.0. So if you look at history, modern civilization, what I think of as Civilization 1.0, started with the agrarian revolution. It was really that spawned modern civilization. And people were farmers, they were shopkeepers, they were carpenters. It was the age of the artisan, and the raw material was land. Then with the Industrial Revolution, we entered what I think of as Civilization 2.0. And we went from the age of the artisan to the age of the corporation. And it was all about efficiency. And the raw materials for that era were energy and steel. Now we're entering an era where the world's largest bookseller has no bookstores. The world's largest taxi company has no cars. The world's largest hotel has no real estate. So it's really the age of information, of service. And if the raw materials of the last era were energy and steel, the raw materials of civilization 3.0 are going to be data and even imagination. Now, if you look at the disruption that has occurred in the past, as we went from civilization 1.0 to 2.0, only 7% of the jobs in 1.0 were still there in 2.0. And I believe that as we go into civilization 3.0, we're going to see more disruption than we've ever seen before. But it's also going to create more wealth creation than we've ever seen before. So what we're going to see is trillions of dollars of new wealth created. So this is the biggest opportunity in human history. And so the good news for all of you is that there's never ever been a better time to be young, to be an entrepreneur, to value education, to value technology, to value hard work than what we are seeing today. Now, there are a variety of forces that are driving this push to civilization 3.0, and it's important to understand some of those forces and to even harness them. So one is just the explosion of data. And so if you look at how much data has been created in human history, and from the beginnings of man till say a year ago, then we call that X. And then you look at how much data was created just in the last year, and that's like 10X. So just during the course of the conference today, there'll be more content on YouTube than in the entire history of Bollywood and Hollywood and everything combined. So we're just seeing this continuous explosion of data. The second force to understand is just the rise of mobility. And so if you think of how long it took for there to be 1 billion phones, it took 100 years for there to be 1 billion landline phones. It took 10 years for there to be 1 billion cell phones. And then it took just 1 year for there to be 1 billion smart cell phones. Now, keep in mind that this phone that we all have and we all carry, that has more computing capacity than NASA had when it put man on the moon. So now we have billions of people walking around the planet with more computing capacity than NASA, the capacity it took to put a man on the moon. The third force is just the emergence of social networks and that the power and really the leveling of the playfield that happens. In the past, you needed to be a giant corporation to reach large audiences. Now, through the use of social media, anyone can reach billions of people, and we've seen evidence of that. We've seen singers, and we've seen platforms like Facebook and YouTube, and Glance in India, or TikTok in China, and Triller now in India and the US. So we're seeing these platforms where anyone can reach very large audiences. So this really shifts, it democratizes access to large markets. The fourth force is just the role that China and India are going to play in the future. So a few hundred years ago, China and India were 2/3 of the world economy. In fact, for 1,500 of the last 2,000 years, India was the world's largest economy. Most people might not realize that. Now, people believe that sometime in this century, we're going to kind of revert to that situation where China and India are going to again play an outsized role in the world economy. So really, some of the great companies are going to be coming out of those areas, and obviously the large markets are going to be in those geographies. And then the fifth one is something that I talk a lot about, and I believe that we're seeing a time when math is starting to actually trump science. And what I mean by that is that you don't necessarily have to know why something is happening. You just simply have to find the pattern. And it ends up that almost every problem ends up being a pattern recognition problem. And so when you have, diseases spreading and they try to understand what it is, and they can't really find the why, but they can find kind of the pattern that leads to it. So everything ends up being a bit of a math problem. And now we're living at a time when computing capacity has reached a tipping point. And so when you look at a game like Go that people have played for thousands of years, and then you start thinking about, how big is this computing capacity that we're talking about? What is this point that it's reached? And so you start thinking about what's the biggest number I can think of. Grains of sand, well, that's not that big. Stars, what is the biggest number? And the biggest number is, how many atoms are there in the universe? And so there's 10 raised to 70 atoms, one with 70 zeros, atoms in the entire universe. I know it's crazy that scientists can calculate these things. But there's like 10 raised to 170 possible combinations in the game of Go. And so we're now living at a time when the computer, kind of the machine learning, the neural network program, can beat the best Go players in the world like a drum, 50 out of 50 times. So we've reached kind of a point of exponential growth and evolution where the world is going to dramatically change in the next 15 or 20 years. And it's actually changed quite a lot in the last 10 or 15 years. And if you think about it, like 10 or 15 years ago, you would have to fumble for quarters so that, and you guys are too young to know this, but to make a phone call, you would go to a phone booth and try to find a quarter to put in the machine. Or you'd have to pull up at a gas station and buy a map so you wouldn't get lost. Or on Friday evenings, you would line up at the Blockbuster to get a movie. And there'd be a long line, and the new movies, there'd only be 3 copies. So look at how much the world has changed in the last 10 or 15 years. And the next 15 years are going to represent unprecedented change. And it's going to be changed for the better. Most diagnostics will be done by computer programs. We'll eliminate many of the diseases that currently plague us. Robots will do most of the hard work that people are still doing. We'll have new forms of energy. We'll have new materials. So basically, we're going to see a transformation of the planet like we've never seen before, and it's going to make the world better. So this is a really, really exciting time to be an entrepreneur, to be a young person, and to be thinking about how can you make the world better. Now, my own venture fund, Bow Capital, BOW, it stands for Better Our World. And that's something I've always believed in. I've always believed, how do you use your platform for good? And what can you do to improve the lives of others? And a lot of venture capitalists are looking for unicorns, companies that might be worth $1 billion. But in fact, I don't think great entrepreneurs think like that. I was blessed to be friends with many of the great entrepreneurs like Steve Jobs, and they never sat around saying, well, how do I build a company that will be worth $1 billion one day? So I coined the term social unicorns. And so what I'm looking for is companies that might have the ability to one day touch 1 billion people. If you're able to touch 1 billion people, then the company is going to be quite valuable. So as you guys think about your own entrepreneurial journeys, you guys are going to be way more successful than I was. Congratulations, you're all winners, and you made it to this point. So whatever thoughts I offer you, I do it with humility, because I know that you guys represent the next generation of great entrepreneurs. So here's, here's some food for thought. So the first thing is that, everything that's ever been done can be done better. So there's no area that you guys can't do better. When Steve Jobs decided to make the cell phone, you can well imagine what his conversation might have been with a regular board. At that point in time, there were already giant companies like Motorola, like Nokia, like Samsung, like Siemens, who were making phones. And so you would have said, Steve, you've never made a phone before, a cell phone. You know, there's these giant companies. Why are you doing it? Is it going to be cheaper? Because at that point in time, all these companies were tripping over each other, trying to make cheaper and cheaper phones. And Steve said, no, actually, it's going to be more expensive. And so he ended up creating the iPhone. And within 3 years, the value of the iPhone business had become bigger at that point in time than Microsoft and Google combined. You know, when Phil Knight said, hey, I'm going to make a shoe, then people have been making shoes for thousands of years. There were gigantic companies that were making shoes. But he came along and he said, you know, I want to make a running shoe and I'm going to use a waffle iron to make the shoe bigger, better. And, you know, the rest is history. When Elon Musk said, hey, I'm going to make a car, there were giant car companies. So that's the first thought, that everything that's been done can be done better. You guys can outthink, you can out-innovate, you can be more creative, and it doesn't matter what the area is, you can do it better. The second piece of advice that I would give you is that everybody has a superpower, and my personal superpower has been that I've always been able to surround myself with people that are way smarter than me. And this has served me really well. I'm not that smart, so I need smart people. But I would advise all of you to follow that as well. Just surround yourself with the smartest people you can, and make them smarter than you. And that's going to serve you well. The third thing is that if you want to be an entrepreneur, it's not a 9-to-5 endeavor. I like to say it's 25/8. It's not even 24/7. It becomes an absolute obsession. You know, you so strongly believe that you can do something and you can do it better that it becomes a complete and total obsession. So whatever you do, you have to be absolutely, totally obsessed with it. You have to wake up thinking about it, you have to go to sleep, and it has to be just a passion and an obsession for you. Number 4 is that the great entrepreneurs have a level of attention to detail. And so there's no detail that's too small. Steve Jobs specified the width of the counters at his stores, and every store had to have that width. If you look at the great entrepreneurs and the level of attention they have to detail, his obsession with the font, that's something that great entrepreneurs share. Another trait, the 5th trait, is they have a sense of urgency. And I know for you guys it's hard because you're kind of balancing school and other things. But in order to build a great company, you need to have this sense of urgency that if you can do something today, do it today. Don't wait till tomorrow. Now, having said all that, there's one trait that is the only trait that matters at the end of the day that entrepreneurs share. And that is never give up. Never give up. Never, ever, ever give up. Persevere, no matter what the pain, just keep going. And you guys will get there. So I thank all of you for this incredible opportunity. And, I'm going to be watching you guys with great interest and great admiration and love. And perhaps I'll get to meet many of you in person, and perhaps some of you will even let me invest in your companies. So I have no doubt that you guys are going to create these Civilization 3.0 companies. They're going to disrupt the status quo. They're going to create entirely new industries that simply didn't exist 5 years ago or a few years ago, and that you are the future. So thank you, Ty, and congratulations, and thanks to the parents, and thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you
Namaste.
so much, Vivek, for that very inspiring and motivating talk. Do we have time for any questions? Some of
Sure.
the audience have been wanting to ask questions of you, so I thought I'll pick one or two of them and
Sure.
ask you.
Yeah.
So one question which was asked was, which are the top two sectors that you find great opportunities in post-COVID? You know,
Yeah. So I think one area is healthcare. I believe that there's going to be massive disruption in the healthcare space, and also, we're going to cut bureaucracy, so things will come to market a lot faster. What COVID did is it catapulted us into 2023. So in 3 months, we have a 3-year acceleration. So everything that would have taken 3 years to happen is happening now. So that's an area. But I would say, what you're involved in, education, I see that that's going to be completely disrupted. We're still on the 1.0 model of education, and if you buy a Tesla, you wake up and you have a new Tesla. But if you go to college for 4 years, then that has to last you for 50 years. There's no upgrades. So I would say healthcare and education are two sectors which will be massively disrupted.
thank you for that. Another question, which is a little more on your current position as owner of Sacramento Kings. How do you think Kings will do in the bubble?
Well, I think we'll do well. We have a young team, and it's going to be like an AAU for those of you who know what that is. They're all kind of living together. There's games every other day, and I think the young legs will win out. So hopefully, my guys are healthy, and I have great hope.
That's great. And one last question, I think, one of the biggest life lessons you've had in your inspiring journey, or is there something that you learned from failure? I mean, they're both kind of connected, but if you can talk through that.
Yeah, failure is, one of the things I always like to say to people is make new mistakes, and just don't make the same mistake twice. And Silicon Valley, everyone accepts failure, and as long as you learn from that, then you can keep moving on. And so and in our culture, we don't think of failure, right? We think of what did you learn, and so everything that was a setback was actually a learning experience. And so I've had many bumps along the way, many setbacks, but important was learn and adapt and keep moving forward.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for those, all those lovely 6 lessons that you, or pointers that you gave all these kids. I'm sure they're all going to imbibe many of them and focus on some of the sectors that you think are very important. Education, healthcare, I think are, hot sectors right now. Thank you for taking the time, Vivek. We really appreciate your addressing us. And as we all do in the post-COVID world, namaskar.
Namaskar.